Welcome to the Aero Export Consultants Podcast. I'm John Young, and this is The Point. Before we get to today's episode, I just wanted to run over quickly a bit of news that came out just yesterday. It looks like BIS has finally started implementing some relief for export controls that are intended for Syria. So I advise everyone to go to the BIS website and read over the short press release that they've got there. I think it'll be very important moving forward. There's not enough information yet, it looks like, to do a whole episode perhaps, so I just wanted to cover it really quickly here. But with that said, let's get to this episode. This month has seen significant action on the peace negotiation front of the Russia and Ukraine conflict. The summit in Alaska with Putin, followed by the meeting with Zelensky and key European allies, are important steps that need to be taken. We can only hope that they result in significant peaceful changes to the current situation. Amidst this evolving environment, forward-looking individuals have begun to wonder what a post-war relationship with Russia might look like, or, in the unfortunate case that the conflict continues, what will an American economic response to a defiant Russia entail? As you know, here at AEC, we engage in predictions only when backed by hard facts and data to draw from. So before we perform any speculation regarding the U.S.'s potential responses to the ongoing situation between Russia and Ukraine, let's first take a look at where we stand now with Russia, with, as always, a special emphasis on export controls and sanctions. After all, this is the Aero Export Consultants Podcast, where our first priority is educating and informing people in industry on regulations and events that could affect their business. So let's start talking shop. As you might be aware, we didn't always have such a fraught trade relationship with Russia. We're currently on Russia Invasion 2.0 of Ukraine, but back before version 1.0 in 2014, when Russia seized Crimea, we had a much better relationship. Russia was even a part of the G8 forum, now the G7, after we booted Russia out of the group in 2014 in response to their illegal annexation of Crimea. The G7 since has played a prominent role in sanctioning Russia, and has even offered direct guidance on preventing sanctions evasion. If you've listened to AEC's partner, Evolutions in Businesses podcast, you'll have heard about that more in depth, and I'll cover some of it in this episode as well. All of this is to say that sanctions against Russia are nothing new. However, it is impossible to deny the impact that the 2022 invasion of Ukraine had on export controls. Our stance against Russia was thrown into a whole new gear, with new levels of crackdown and intensified restrictions on all trade with Russia. And this stance and its effects on Russia have expanded beyond just America. Along with us, our NATO allies have also intensified their sanctions against Russia, seeking to penalize the invader's actions in increasing ways. This also includes our work with the Global Export Control Coalition, or GECC, which are countries that have committed to implementing substantially similar export controls on Russia similar to what we have. Recently, there have even been suggestions that our allies have taken harsher steps than we have in targeting Russia. According to a Politico article, there are harsher stances being taken by the US in private with regard to Russia, but that is softened in some of our messaging. This is likely seen by the US as necessary for our diplomatic efforts, but it is worth noting that even if our rhetoric is blunted in order to lull Russia to the table, our actions remain pointed in their implementation, even in actions taken as recently as this month, which I will bring up again later. So what are our current restrictions in place against Russia? This episode will largely be focused on the export controls under BIS's jurisdiction. It should be noted, though, that in addition to the controls I will be talking about, there are also significant sanctions levied by OFAC and additional restrictions under the jurisdiction of the State Department as well. When we look at the EAR, there are several different sections within the regulations that are targeted specifically at Russia. Their actions in Ukraine earned them an uncomfortable seat in Part 746 of the EAR, which deals with embargoes and other special controls, and these controls are nothing if not specially aimed at Russia. In addition to the general all-encompassing policy towards Russia, this section holds 5 supplemental sections in Part 746 that were expressly created to restrict Russia. These supplement sections include specific sanctions on certain high-priority aspects of the Russian economy that we are in place to interfere with, including specific aims at the oil and gas industry, industrial goods, luxury goods, software, and more. But let's talk a little more about the general all-encompassing policy. Any item that is subject to the EAR requires a license to be exported to Russia. This includes even EAR 99 items, which for most countries would be no license required. You might think that doesn't sound harsh enough. A license isn't that hard to acquire. It is when there is also a standing policy of denial for any license for all cases. If you attempt to obtain an export license to do business with Russia, it will be denied. There are few exceptions for food and medical aid, but even medical devices have undergone restrictions in this area as well. In keeping with this policy of denial, license exceptions have also been restricted to Russia. There are a few instances where exceptions are made, but they seem tailored towards aid and American interests in the region. For example, there are possibilities for TMP license exceptions for items for use by the news media, government license exceptions for government work, TSU license exceptions for civil and wholly U.S.-owned branches of U.S. companies in the region, and the occasional MED medical license exception, etc. But these are likely extremely rare cases. In effect, we have shut down trade with Russia and embargoed them in all but name. It also should go without saying that Russia is also under the restrictions we see for countries like China, where any trade remotely military end-use related is shut down. Additionally, oil and gas is an area that the U.S. has heavily targeted as well. A license, with a presumption of denial as always, is required for several different categories of items that are intended either directly or indirectly for Russia's oil or gas industry. Specific items in this industry are included in the common high priority lists, along with other industry items. Let's take a look at the CHPL closer, because this is where you can really see the impact of what we are inflicting on Russia economically. The Common High Priority Items List, or CHPL, is an itemized list of 50 common high priority items to highlight for industry that pose a heightened risk of being diverted illegally to Russia because of their importance to Russia's war efforts. This list was published in February of last year and was created with the input of the EU, Japan, and the UK. The list is divided into 4 tiers with some sub-tiers. Tier 1 are items of the highest concern due to their critical role in the production of advanced Russian precision-guided weapon systems, Russia's lack of domestic production, and limited global manufacturers. Tier 2 are additional electronics items for which Russia may have some domestic production capability, but a preference to source from the United States and its partners and allies. Tier 3.A are further electronic components used in Russian weapon systems with a broader range of suppliers. Tier 3B are mechanical and other components utilized in Russian weapon systems. Tier 4A, manufacturing, production, and quality testing equipment for electronic components, circuit boards, and modules. And Tier 4B are computer numerically controlled or CNC machine tools and components. And to be broken down even further, Tier 1 is comprised of 4 HS codes that describe integrated circuits or microelectronics. Tier 2 is comprised of 5 HS codes containing electronics items related to wireless communications, satellite-based radio navigation, and passive electronic components. Tier 3A is comprised of 16 HS codes containing discrete electronic components, electrical plugs and connectors, navigation equipment, and digital cameras. Tier 3B is comprised of 9 HS codes used to export mechanical and non-electronic components such as bearings and optical components. Tier 4A is comprised of 11 HS codes concerning manufacturing equipment for production and quality testing of electronic components and circuits, and Tier 4B is comprised of 5 HS codes concerning computer numerical control or CNC machine tools for working metal and related components. As an aside, if you work in any of these industries and potentially with products of these HS codes, you should engage in additional due diligence to ensure your products are not being diverted to Russia. The reason for this is because, as stated by published BIS guidances, the high priority items list is primarily based on the HS code classification of Russian weapons system components recovered on the battlefield in Ukraine. Items described by these HS codes have been found in multiple Russian weapons systems used against Ukraine, including the Kalibr cruise missile, the KH-101 cruise missile, and the Orlan-10 UAV. While not exhaustive, the list provides, quote, prioritized targets for customs and enforcement agencies around the world and has informed discussion in international engagements conducted by BIS and Treasury leadership as well as EU and UK counterparts. And to reiterate, this is the goal of targeted export controls on Russia. The US, along with the GECC, which by the way is comprised of 39 nations, is intent on denying Russia's military-industrial complex and defense supply chains from functioning. This is economic warfare at its most direct, denying an adversary from manufacturing or obtaining the very weaponry that allows them to wage war. But naturally, the response to these pressures is for Russia to look for outside sources of the necessary elements we are denying them. According to our government's assessments, this has resulted in Russia tasking its intelligence services with finding ways to circumvent sanctions and export controls to replace needed equipment. The main way they accomplish this is by conducting business with third-party actors to obtain technology we have denied them from most other sources. Our own export controls and sanctions account for this, however. As stated, quote, BIS continues to build and sustain the GECC, whose members imposed substantially similar export controls on Russia, targeting third countries and impeding Russia's ability globally to obtain commercially available items such as semiconductors. These third-party countries primarily act as sources of diversion, which is the next element of regulations targeting I wanted to bring up. First, when we speak of diversion, it's important to know that Russia is not alone in facing these new restrictions. Belarus, for one, is seen as basically a part of Russia in these regulations. They appear on every specific addition to the EAR and are noted as a prime location of Russian diversion. It's also important to keep in mind that as Russia gains more territory in Ukraine, Ukraine also faces more export controls, to ensure that some regions in Ukraine are not in possession of controlled technology that Russia can then seize as part of their conquest. Russia's evasion tactics are varied in their approach. In response, various international organizations such as the GECC and G7 have compiled methods for industry to sniff out when potential diversion efforts are at play. These methods include red flag lists and best practices for industry to take note of and follow to ensure that their controlled technology is not diverted by malicious actors to Russia. I urge you to read through these various guidances for yourself in detail, but I'll give you a brief overview of what they entail. For the red flags guidance, indicating potential export control and sanctions evasion on behalf of Russia, sudden changes in business activity after the 24th of February 2022 or after subsequent changes in export controls and sanctions, false, inaccurate, or missing documentation, concealing the end user of items, inconsistencies in the transaction documentation and process, vague details and/or incomplete information from the customer, especially regarding end use and end user, dividing an invoice value into smaller amounts to remain under the value limits of sanctioned goods or export controls, suspicious customer information in regard to their business and history, customer has connections of concern with Russia or sanctioned entities, concerning business practices such as one-off transactions and heavily restricted goods, last-minute changes to parties involved with the transaction from an entity in Russia or Belarus to an entity in another country, payments from entities located in third countries that are not otherwise involved with the transactions, particularly through a sanctioned country, and customer unwilling to provide certification that it will not sell items to Russia or sanctioned parties in third countries. As for the best practices, they essentially boil down to screening parties to the transaction, conducting your due diligence on the transaction, analyzing the risk, and ultimately making wise decisions if information is uncertain. There are additional details for these points that I also urge you to check for yourself. You can find extra guidance regarding Russia in places like the BIS website where they catalog the different publications. These examples I've laid out exemplify just how far we're willing to go in our efforts to punish Russia. They're not the extent of our actions. As I've already said, we've heavily sanctioned the invaders through different methods and agencies as well. But we continue to lead an international effort to punish Russia and any who would assist them, even indirectly, in their invasion of Ukraine, and it continues to this day. I spoke earlier of an example of our continued efforts, and this comes as recently as this month. You likely saw in the news that we have increased our tariffs against India in the wake of their importing Russian Federation oil. Executive Order 14066 prohibited, among other things, the importation into the United States of certain products of Russian Federation origin, including crude oil, petroleum fuels, oils, and products of their distillation, and this was in order to address what was described as an extraordinary threat to national security and foreign policy of the United States. And it seems we are including other countries in this action as well. Therefore, any action in support of Russian aggression in Ukraine is seen as a threat against our national security and foreign policy, and will therefore be penalized. Accordingly, it was determined necessary to impose additional ad valorem duties on imports of articles of India into the U.S., who is indirectly or indirectly importing Russian Federation oil. This was seen as an effective punishment on India. An additional duty rate of 25% on Indian goods to the U.S. was added on August 6th and recently implemented. I think this recent event is proof that our punitive actions have not halted. Even if our rhetoric is more diplomatic, as some have criticized, we are not holding any trust in Russia and continue to punish them severely, along with anyone who seeks to assist them during this conflict. This is where I enter speculation territory, but it seems to me that recent actions are indicative of what will likely be future actions. I've maintained that even if peace should win out, our severe stance against Russia will likely persist for a time. And with peace not yet the reality, it stands to reason that our penalties and harsh actions will continue as well. Secretary of State Rubio was positive about the recent peace talks, saying that for the first time there seemed to be some movement. This should be celebrated. But as long as Russia holds out of serious discussion and continues their war efforts, we should expect sanctions and export controls to continue. As always, our part in this as industry professionals is to protect our products and technology and watch out for illicit efforts to subvert U.S. laws and regulations. If your business could use some assistance in that area, remember that AEC is here to help. For all your questions and export compliance needs, contact us here at Aero Export Consultants. Research done right, compliance made simple. I'm John Young, and this has been The Point.